Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I hope you are all doing very, very well today. As a kind of preparation, if you like, for a planned, scheduled live stream that is going to take place Sunday, June 2nd, 2019, 6 a.m. Tokyo time, I'd like to talk to you very briefly about the film that I plan to talk about during that live stream. The release is Spine number 84 from the Criterion Collection. 84. This film. Good morning. This is Spine number 84 in the Criterion Collection. This is 1959's Good Morning, directed by Yasujiro Ozu. And this is the recent Blu-ray of the film, which is a very interesting Blu-ray. But I should mention very quickly that the film Good Morning was also released by the Criterion Collection in an earlier DVD, also Spine number 84. I should say that this DVD has aspect ratio of 1.33 to 1, and I think that is it as far as any kind of special features are concerned. The film was also released on a Criterion Laserdisc, which is also right here. This is Laserdisc Spine number 368. And as you can see, the cover art is very much similar as between this earlier DVD and the Laserdisc. And as you can see here also, the back of the Laserdisc is like so, which kind of mirrors the back of the DVD, which is very interesting, although we have this picture of the sister, Setsuko, and the English tutor. But the front is pretty much the same. The front is this kind of futuristic style television set with one of the young boys adorning the cover. This is Minoru, the character of Minoru. So this is the kind of the earlier releases of this film, Good Morning. But then Good Morning was later released on a Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray is 1.37 to 1 in terms of aspect ratio. As I said, this is 1.33 to 1. This is 1.37 to 1. And this is indicated as being 93 minutes. And this is indicated as being 94 minutes, although I cannot tell any substantive difference in terms of the contents. So I don't think we're talking about any kind of deleted scene or anything like that, although I'm not quite sure. But sometimes this happens with respect to different releases of the same film. Sometimes there might be discrepancies of a minute or so. So that is not something that's all too surprising to me. But what's interesting about this new Blu-ray release is that it has a set of features that are very interesting, as well as an essay. So let's get to those right now. So first of all, this is a new 4K digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack, which is great, by the way. It's really a beautiful picture. And then we have there's a new interview with film scholar David Bordwell. And David Bordwell is a giant in film studies and the like, so his comments are really they're really great, and they are talking about the film in the context of the history of Ozu's filmography, and also in the context of the film as it appeared in the late 1950s, which is a very critical part of the history of the cinema of Japan, because around this time we see the emergence of television and how that affects cinema going. But also there are many different social implications at play here, not just television, not just the impact of television on cinema, but also social implications during this time of Japanese history, which is about 15 or so years after the end of the war, and we see the kind of economic progress or signs of some kind of progress, if you want to call it that, scattered throughout the film. And I think Bordwell touches on this very well, but he also touches on the context of the film as a work of art, and therefore Bordwell's comments in this interview, I think, are really welcome, and just anything by Bordwell is fantastic. Then there's a new video essay on Ozu's use of humor by critic David Cairns. Now this is really important. I really like this supplement because this also talks about this film in the context of Ozu's filmography. But it also talks about this notion of Ozu as a filmmaker that relied upon comedy, and also as a filmmaker that was very playful in terms of his filmmaking, in terms of his stories that he told. The reason why this is important, of course, is generally speaking, this film is very humorous and has lots of jokes, and much of the humor, not all, but much of the humor focuses on flatulence and farting. So some people might be put off by that, but there is a kind of a way of looking at this kind of humor that might make the subject matter seem maybe lowbrow, but lowbrow isn't necessarily a bad word or a naughty word. On the contrary, there is something very fun and childish in a good way, and quite carefree about the way that humor is employed in this film. It's quite charming, actually, and that's something I'd like to talk about more in the live stream if I can. But some people might be curious as to why Ozu, who's probably well known for being a filmmaker of very serious artistic dramas, if you will, like Tokyo Story, Late Spring, etc., why would he make a film like this that has a lot of fart jokes and that sort of thing? Well, I think David Cairns puts this all in perspective, and I think it's very important to understand these points as they're expressed by David Cairns, which I think is a brilliant expression of this notion of use of comedy in Ozu's films. And I should say also that when we're talking about the flatulence here, we're not necessarily talking about something that is presented in a kind of dirty or filthy way, but we're talking about it in the context of how it's presented as a means of comedy, as a means of trying to generate laughter. And it's something that is almost very musical, and something that is very kind of accepted in the world that's being created by Ozu in Good Morning. So there is a lot of pleasantness, actually, with respect to the flatulence. And so perhaps that's something that we might be able to talk about during the live stream. And also, I should say that not only does that exist in the context of Ozu's filmography, and David Cairns rightly points this out because Ozu has a kind of history with this approach to comedy. And so this film is not necessarily a one-off, so to speak, at least as David Cairns argues, and I think rightly so. In other words, this isn't an odd film in Ozu's filmography when we think about the way in which humor has been employed in Ozu's films in the past. So I think that creates a greater case for the importance of this film in the context of Ozu's filmography, and thus should help to elevate it from whatever quote-unquote minor status it might have had relative to the other great masterpieces in Ozu's filmography. In other words, I think there is a great case that is being made by both Cairns and David Bordwell that this film is deserving of masterpiece status. And I actually would agree with the assessment of these gentlemen. Then there are two very interesting supplements to follow. So first is the 1932 silent film by Ozu called I Was Born But. I Was Born But is a lovely, lovely film. And it's one of the great Ozu films, and I'm so glad it's included in here. It's included here, I think, because many people see a kind of thematic connection between the two. And I think for the longest time, I think the film Good Morning was oftentimes compared to the film I Was Born But as being kind of a remake of the earlier film. And I think that has a lot of reasonableness behind it. However, what I like about this release, and in particular the essay, which I'll get to in a second, is that I think it's safe to say that the films are distinct. Good Morning is a distinct work from I Was Born But. They are connected in certain thematic ways, mind you. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I think each stands apart from the other in a very respectful way and in a very unique and focused way. So I like this inclusion of this film because perhaps there might be a discussion of how they are related or how they are unrelated. And I like to think that that would be up to you, the viewer, to decide just how close an affinity the two films have. And you might think that, yes, there is a closeness to the two films such that perhaps this later film can be seen as a remake of the earlier film. And I think that's a legitimate approach, and I wouldn't disagree with that at all. All I'm suggesting is, as the Criterion Collection release seems to be suggesting, I think there is room for a different reading of the relationship between these two films. That's all. And that different reading would be, in essence, that they are not necessarily related in terms of a remake relationship per se, but rather they stand on their own, distinct from one another, even though there might be some thematic links or some exploration of similar themes in the two films. So that's I Was Born But. Then there is a fragment of A Straightforward Boy, a 1929 silent film by Ozu, which is another very interesting fragment because we see children as characters. And Ozu's films, I think, are filled with very memorable children characters. Good Morning is a very prime example of this. So to see A Straightforward Boy, the fragment of the 1929 film, I think is so eye-opening and really a kind of great thing. So the supplements and this Blu-ray are truly something to behold, I would say. And it's really nice to have it's really nice to have these options because, as I say, the film is, I think, so deserving of attention and critical assessment and reassessment, as the case may be. And so I think, as good as this earlier DVD was, and as good as the Laserdisc was, and they were really great, I would say that the lack of supplements on these earlier releases, compared with the packed supplements of this Blu-ray release, I think makes the case stronger for the Blu-ray, and also the Blu-ray helps to make the case for Good Morning as being a critical and indeed a masterpiece level work within the context of Yasujiro Ozu's filmography. So I'm very taken with this Blu-ray release. Speaking of which, there's also, we should say something about the essay. Now, the essay is by Jonathan Rosenbaum, and it's called Structures and Strictures in Suburbia. This is a great essay. Now, I should point out that the earlier DVD release and the Laserdisc had the essay by Rick Prelinger, and the essay it's not so long, but it's a kind of overview or explanation of the film, which is quite a good essay. I really like the essay from the earlier releases from Criterion, but this new essay or the essay for the new release by Jonathan Rosenbaum, is truly a work. This is a fantastic essay for many reasons, not least of which being, as I suggested earlier, this essay, I think, makes a great case for reassessment of the film Good Morning. It reassesses it in many ways, but I'll give you two examples which I think are really interesting. Jonathan Rosenbaum cites, Jonathan Rosenbaum cites Donald Ritchie's view of Ozu's film Good Morning, and I think Jonathan Rosenbaum tries to break free of Ritchie's view of this film, which might seem to have been somewhat formalized and maybe a bit relegating the film to something lesser than first rank status, so to speak. Well, I think Jonathan Rosenbaum rightly points out that this film is deserving of masterpiece status, and it's a film that he talks about in glowing terms and with a kind of almost loving terms. And so I'm very much pleased with this, because because I think what Jonathan Rosenbaum is trying to suggest, which is something that I think wasn't necessarily addressed in earlier views of this work, for example, by Donald Ritchie, is that this film is, I think, more complicated than one might think at the very start. And the fact that it's quite complicated and nuanced makes it a film that is worth examining and re-examining and watching over and over again. And so I really applaud Jonathan Rosenbaum for his attempt at engendering reassessment in this work. The other thing is, as I alluded to before, Jonathan Rosenbaum tries to make the distinction between this work and the earlier film I Was Born But. I think because there's something of a for lack of a better word, maybe a stigma, although I don't quite mean it in those strong terms. In other words, if you have a remake of an earlier film, usually, not always, but usually the remake is the film that is considered to be the lesser of the films. The original film is considered to be the better of the film. And so if you have Good Morning and you think about it in terms of being a remake of an earlier film, then almost immediately that might tend to suggest, implicitly perhaps, that Good Morning is, quote, the lesser work. Well, I think Jonathan Rosenbaum tries to make distinctions between these two films in terms of thematic use and stuff. And I think also some of the supplements make this point as well, which I think is great about this release. And thus, it's sort of breaking free the film Good Morning from this remake status, if you will. And as I say, I think the remake view or interpretation is a valid one, and I still agree with it to a certain extent. But I think also there is room for a different interpretation of this film, Good Morning, namely that it is its own independent work. And I think this release, which includes the great Jonathan Rosenbaum essay, goes towards lending credence to that very reasonable interpretation. Wonderful, wonderful essay, so I'm very, very pleased. I should also mention and I should also mention this artwork. So art directors Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman. Illustrations, Tatsuro Kyuchi. Designer, Eric Skillman. Look at this artwork. Isn't this great? Now, I don't want to mention too much about the details of the film, because I'm going to leave that for the live stream. But you can see here that you have this lovely artwork with the two children that are part of the main narrative, and the decor of the inside of the house, which is also very important, and it goes around the back here like so. And then those motifs are still continued like so. And then we have the children outside, and you can see the distance. And this is a very important scene in the film. And then we have this wrapped around like so. Really lovely lovely presentation, if I do say so myself. It's just great, charming. It has this almost sense of nostalgia, and there's a real beautiful use of color, and which recalls the great use of color in this film Good Morning. So all of this is just a feel-good release, I think. In many ways, it's charming, it's witty. It also is a perfect thematic encapsulation of what the film is, which is this colorful, funny, charming film that perhaps has more nuance and complication than meets the eye. So this is Spy number 84, Good Morning, and the Blu-ray is highly, highly recommended. So with that in mind, my friends, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite you to the live stream, which is going to be scheduled to take place on Sunday, June 2nd, 2019, 6 a.m. Tokyo time. And if you're happening to watch this video after the fact, after the live stream has been finished, so you can find the video uploaded on this channel, and you can watch the video of the live stream where hopefully I'll have talked about this film in detail. The live stream will include spoilers, so please, if you are wary of being spoiled, please be sure to watch the film before joining the live stream or watching the live stream, because I will be talking about the film in detail. I don't think we'll have time to talk about I Was Born But, so I'd like to focus my discussion with you on the work Good Morning. There are many things that I think we can talk about, but as a kind of preparation, I thought there might be some questions or points that I could bring up now, and then maybe we can raise them again during the live stream if you're interested. So the first is perhaps, I'm curious to know your thoughts about what you think of the film. Do you like the film? Do you not like the film? I'm also curious to know your thoughts about, for example, what are some of your favorite characters in the film? What are some of your favorite moments in the film? Are there any particular episodes that strike your fancy? Are there any particular characters that you really, really like or really had a reaction to? Because there are so many characters in this film, not just the children, of course, but also the adults and the parents. And there's sets of families here that I think are intertwined in a way that, if you think about it, it's actually quite complicated. It's a complicated web of human networking, and so and then you realize that the people are more related than one might realize at first glance. It's quite a fascinating web of interconnectivity, of human relationship interconnectivity. It's almost like a Robert Altman film or something. But so what are some of the character scenarios that registered with you the most? Also, I'd like to ask you, if there's time, of course, what do you make of this idea of language and how language is portrayed in this film? After all, the title is Good Morning. In Japanese is Ohayo. And there is a sort of narrative significance to this particular phrase, Ohayo, or good morning, as those of you who've seen the film know. And that is a spoken phrase, and there is some suggestion about the notion of language and its place in contemporary Japanese society and whether it's useful or not. So I'd like to, and how that's depicted in the film as we progress from character to character to character. So I'd like to know your thoughts about that. Also, I'd like to know your thoughts about what do you think about the way in which generational issues are treated? Because we are dealing with one generation, the adults, and then a younger generation, which are the children. And I think different issues emerge with respect to each generation. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts or comments about the way in which generational concerns are addressed and explored in this film. Also, I wonder if you have a sense of what Japan is like during this time, which is the late 1950s. What are some details that you think are worth mentioning that would indicate a kind of trait of Japanese society that you think is important to talk about? Not least of which being this idea of TV, washing machines, this idea of a suburban community, this idea of salesmen, and this idea of an emerging consumable or income, and so and also this idea of conspicuous consumption, perhaps. How prevalent that is or how insignificant that is, it's really up to you to decide and determine based on your own interpretation. So I'd like to know your thoughts, if you have any, with respect to what you think this film shows us about certain aspects of Japanese society, at least how you think it's depicted in this film. And also, are there any stylistic choices or any artistic choices? And also, I'd like to ask you, are there any stylistic moments or any moments of cinematic flourish or artistry that you recall in this film that you think are really worth mentioning? For instance, maybe certain compositions of scenes, maybe certain uses of color, maybe the way in which music is employed, maybe the way in which certain sounds are employed, maybe the way in which cuts, edits are made, the way in which characters are introduced or reintroduced, that sort of thing. A lot of this has to do with Ozu's style, especially during this period, the late 1950s, which is, I think, for all intents and purposes, his final period in terms of his long filmography. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are in terms of Ozu's style, or what you think Ozu's style is, his visual style, his cinematic style, his use of sound, etc. And the framing of characters, the frame, the shot, the mise en scène. Anything that you want to talk about with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think of Ozu's style as it's presented here in Good Morning. And so I think if we have time also, we can talk about other things about this film. Are there things that you are a little bit confused by? If so, please bring it up. I'm not the biggest expert in this film, but I'll certainly try my best. And because I know, for instance, the plot is a little bit, actually it's actually quite complicated in certain ways, because there's so many interrelationships that one has to keep track of, and there's very little in terms of a kind of a quick and easy presentation of what's going on. In other words, Ozu is not, he doesn't immediately show all of the characters and then let them interact. No, it sort of, we cut into the action, so to speak, without necessarily having all the information at first, but it sort of accumulates in our mind as the film progresses. And that's a sort of interesting signature style of Ozu. But it might cause some questions to be had about what exactly is going on, who is this person, etc. So if you have any questions like that, please let me know, or please let the group know. And I might not necessarily have all the answers, but maybe someone out there will. So yes, any other questions that you have about this film, let's talk about it during the live stream. Okay, my friends, so that is basically it. So I guess if you have time, perhaps if you want to watch it again, I think it would be worth watching and just trying to soak in as much as possible, trying to keep all the characters in mind. I think that's a very interesting exercise to go through, because as far as I can tell, there are 4 families that are being portrayed, plus the English tutor story, and plus the Bohemian neighbor story. So there's actually a set of 6 characters, the 4 families, plus the Bohemian neighbors, and then the English tutor. So that's 6 characters. And then if you add in the drinking bar, that's a 7th set. And if you add in the salesman, then that's an 8th set of characters. And if you add in the school teachers, I think there are secondary characters, that's for sure, but they are somewhat prominent and important in terms of the narrative. So that's yet another set of characters. So there's a great set of characters, and it's sometimes difficult to keep track, but I think it's worth it's worth it if you have time to watch it again and try to soak in as much detail as possible, because as I said, and as this Criterion Blu-ray release seems to suggest, this film is in a great way much more complicated than I think it might seem at first glance. And I think that's wonderful about this film. It is so rich and deep, and it's got a lot of fart jokes as well. So what a fabulous combination. So yes, so if you have time, please watch the film again. And if not, I'd still love to hear your thoughts and comments during the live stream. And I look forward to seeing you this Sunday. As I said, this is the first time I'm doing this, so I might make a lot of mistakes along the way. So please forgive me. I'm still trying to learn as I go. But hopefully with your input and your discussion and enthusiasm, hopefully this might lead to a regular thing. And I hope it does. So anyway, my friends, I hope you're doing well. And I hope to see you this Sunday. Until we meet again, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great films. Cheers. One of the things I want to ask during the live stream, if I have time, is, right, as we see it in the film, does that really work? I don't know. I've never really,